You really ought to know that your great-grandparents could have driven an electric car that went nearly as far on a single charge as some modern EVs. We're not talking about some steampunk fantasy. We're talking about the Detroit Electric, a vehicle sold over a century ago that was advertised to go about 80 miles per charge and in one legendary test, traveled more than 200 miles on a single battery. So stick around, because by the end, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about automotive history, and you might even laugh along the way. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1900s, and the world is at a crossroads. The horseless carriage has been around for a couple of decades, but there is no clear consensus on how these newfangled machines should be powered. Internal combustion engines run on gasoline or kerosene. Steam engines are still chugging away in some automobiles. And then there are electric cars. Yes, electric cars, quietly humming along city streets, leaving no smelly exhaust, and no need for messy cranking to start the motor. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, electric vehicles are not just a curiosity, they're a major contender. Companies like Baker, Columbia, and most famously, the Anderson Carriage Company's Detroit Electric are producing cars by the thousands and selling them to wealthy urbanites, doctors, and forward-thinking women. These aren't little golf carts. They are elegantly styled coaches with curved glass windows, fine upholstery, and all the modern conveniences of the day. Detroit Electric emerges in 1907 when the Anderson Carriage Company, a maker of horse-drawn buggies, sees the writing on the wall and decides to transition to motor cars. The company bets big on battery power at a time when gasoline engines are still finicky, noisy, and difficult to start. Gasoline engines require hand cranking, a dangerous and sometimes deadly endeavor that leaves many an early driver with a broken arm or worse. Women in particular find this hand crank business unappealing, so electric cars, which start instantly with the turn of a key, become the vehicle of choice for affluent ladies who want to drive themselves. Doctors also prefer electric cars because they're quiet, easy to operate, and can be parked inside without filling the house with toxic fumes. You could literally drive your electric car into your living room if the door was wide enough. Try doing that with a Model T without being kicked out of the family. One of the key selling points of the Detroit Electric is its range. Advertisements boast that the car can travel around 80 miles on a single charge. Considering that most trips in the 1910s are short jaunts around town, 80 miles is more than enough to get to work, do the shopping, visit friends, and get back home. Even more impressive, the company offers an optional Edison nickel-iron battery that further extends range and longevity. This battery is heavy and expensive. It costs as much as half the price of the car, but it allows the Detroit Electric to reach 90 or 100 miles under typical driving conditions. In fact, one record-setting test sees a Detroit Electric cover over 211 miles on a single charge. To put that in perspective, that's like driving from Chicago to Indianapolis without plugging in 1916. People today get range anxiety if their EV won't make it to the next charging station, but early Detroit Electric owners were merrily gliding along for hours. And when you're driving at a top speed of around 20 miles per hour, 211 miles is more than 10 hours behind the wheel. Plenty of time to enjoy the scenery or, knit a sweater. Imagine telling someone in 1910 that in 100 years people will pay top dollar for a vehicle that goes 250 miles between charges. They'd say, "So what? My Detroit Electric practically does that now, and I don't need an app for it." Why are these early electrics so efficient? For one thing, they're lightweight relative to early gas cars, and their top speeds are modest. They use lead-acid batteries, which, while bulky, provide a consistent flow of current. They also feature regenerative braking in a rudimentary form, though drivers don't know it by that name, because the motor works as a generator when going down hills, slightly recharging the battery. People who drove them didn't call it regen or think about kilowatt hours. They just knew that if they eased off the throttle, the car slowed down and the battery gauge stopped dropping. It's a bit like your grandmother putting a cake in the oven and not knowing the physics of convection. She just knows it works. Let's do a quick listicle to keep things spicy. Here are 5 things you should know about early electric cars, and you won't believe number 4. Electric cars were mainstream before gas cars. In the early 1900s, electric vehicles outsold gasoline cars in many urban areas. Cities like New York and Chicago had charging stations, and taxi fleets were experimenting with battery power. Women were key drivers of adoption. Because electric cars didn't require manual cranking, they appealed to women who wanted independence without the literal muscle work. This made companies like Detroit Electric market directly to female consumers, depicting them behind the wheel in ads. Quite progressive for the time. Range was impressive. While modern drivers fret about reaching the next charger, early electrics like the Detroit Electric regularly achieved 70 to 100 miles per charge. The 211-mile test run was widely publicized as a record, proving that battery power wasn't just for short trips. Fancy batteries were available. The optional Edison nickel-iron battery added cost, but offered longevity and more range. It was also nearly indestructible. Some of these century-old batteries still work today. Who needs planned obsolescence when your battery outlives you? They died out because of infrastructure and marketing, not technology. When cheap gasoline became widely available and Henry Ford's mass-produced Model T undercut electric cars on price, the public shifted away from battery vehicles. Charging infrastructure lagged, and electric car companies couldn't compete with the convenience of gas stations and the allure of long road trips that gas cars promised. It's worth pausing on that last point. If electric cars were so great, why did they disappear for nearly a century? The short answer is economics and infrastructure. Gasoline engines improved rapidly. Charles Kettering's electric starter, introduced in 1912, eliminated the dangerous hand crank and made gas cars far easier to operate. Suddenly, the convenience edge that electric cars enjoyed vanished. Meanwhile, Ford's Model T cost a fraction of what a Detroit Electric did. You could buy a brand new Model T for under $400 in the 1910s, whereas a Detroit Electric could cost $2,000 or more, depending on the battery. That's like choosing between a used Corolla and a new Tesla Roadster. Guess which one most families picked? Gasoline became cheap and widely available thanks to discoveries of oil fields in Texas and Oklahoma, and the construction of nationwide road networks. Gas stations sprung up across the country, while charging infrastructure remained limited to cities. The final nail in the coffin was the ease of long-distance travel. Internal combustion engines could be refueled in minutes and drive hundreds of miles without stopping. Electric cars were perfect for city life, but impractical for rural America, where distances were longer and electricity was less reliable. Ironically, the same reasons early electrics thrived, quiet operation, ease of use, and decent range, became less relevant as gas cars improved. What's fascinating is that the core promises of early electrics are the same promises modern EVs make. Quiet, smooth driving? Check. Instant torque and easy acceleration? Absolutely. Reduced maintenance compared to internal combustion engines? Yes, indeed. Tesla owners brag about not needing oil changes, just as Detroit Electric owners bragged about not needing to crank their engines. The parallels are uncanny. Even the range anxiety conversation is recycled. Back then, newspapers published articles questioning whether 100 miles per charge was enough for Mrs. Jones to visit her mother in the next town. Today, bloggers debate whether 250 miles is sufficient for a weekend road trip. The numbers have changed, but the anxieties remain hilariously familiar. Let's throw in some humor because history can be both informative and entertaining. According to a story passed down by collectors, a Detroit Electric owner in 1915 once attempted to drag race a friend's gasoline-powered car down Main Street. The electric car surged ahead quietly while the gas car sputtered and stalled. The friend fumbled with the crank, and by the time the engine roared to life, the electric driver had already stopped at the finish line, sipping tea. The lesson? Never underestimate the torque of an electric motor or the patience of a tea-drinking socialite. Another anecdote. Edison, who provided batteries for Detroit Electric, allegedly told a customer that if she ever got stranded, she could pour a glass of lemonade on the battery terminals because the acid might revive it. Whether or not that worked, it shows that even the pioneers believed in DIY roadside fixes long before AA came along. One often overlooked aspect of the early electric era is the design. Detroit electric cars were gorgeous. They featured enclosed coach-style bodies that sheltered occupants from the elements, with large windows and luxurious interiors. Some models had sliding glass doors and rotating front seats that allowed passengers to turn and face the rear for a conversation. Think of it as the precursor to today's swivel seats in minivans. Many vehicles had decorative trim, high-quality upholstery, and even vanity mirrors. Some owners customized their cars with custom paint jobs and monogram details. In the era before cup holders, Detroit Electrics exuded elegance. And because they lacked large radiators or exhaust pipes, designers had more freedom to play with shapes and proportions. It's as if Tesla married a Victorian carriage, all the benefits of new technology wrapped in old-world charm. So, what lessons can we take from the early electric car boom? Here's one. Technology adoption isn't just about how good something is, it's about how well it fits into the broader economic and infrastructural ecosystem. Early electric cars were ahead of their time in many ways, but the world around them wasn't ready. Fueling infrastructure, battery affordability, and public perception all had to align. As we navigate the transition to electric vehicles today, we're revisiting the same challenges. We worry about charging stations, battery lifespan, and cost, and whether electric power can meet our long-distance driving needs. The difference is that we've had a century of technological progress, and we're building on lessons learned from our ancestors' experiments. We stand on the shoulders of electric giants who quietly zipped around town while everyone else was making a racket. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you could time travel to the 1910s, would you pick a Detroit Electric or a Model T? What would you miss most about modern cars if you had to switch? The Bluetooth? The heated seats? Or perhaps you'd relish the chance to drive in near silence while everyone else is choking on exhaust? Leave a comment below and share your answer. Do you think we'll look back 100 years from now and laugh at how primitive our current EVs seem? Who knows? Maybe some future historian will be reading your comment. Before we wrap up, here's a little electric car joke for the road. Why did the electric car break up with the gas car? It got tired of all the fumes and drama and wanted a more stable relationship. But seriously, early electric cars were about as drama-free as motoring gets. No gas, no gears, no spark plugs to foul. Just flip a switch, check the ammeter, and you're off. In conclusion, the story of the Detroit Electric and its contemporaries reminds us that innovation often comes in waves. Electric cars weren't invented in Silicon Valley or during the 1970s energy crisis. They were thriving in the Victorian and Edwardian eras, offering practical transportation solutions long before most people had electricity in their homes. They boasted ranges that rival some modern EVs, and one even shattered expectations by traveling more than 200 miles on a single charge. These vehicles catered to a demographic that valued ease, elegance, and safety, proving that consumers have always cared about convenience and comfort. Their decline had less to do with technology and more to do with economics, infrastructure, and the marketing might of oil companies. As we steer into an electrified future, it's worth remembering that electric cars are not a fad but a revival, a return to roots that were planted over a century ago. Thanks so much for watching. Your support means the world. If you could drop a like and subscribe, that would really help the channel. Have a phenomenal day.